today we're going to talk a little bit about the sign we've been working on for the last week or two for Harman's Cheese, which is located in Sugar Hill, New Hampshire. And this is what we have so far on our sign. This sign is made out of 1.5 inch thick Western red cedar, and it is V-carved, which means if you look up in here, we're using a bit that essentially looks like a V. This would be maybe a 110 or 100 degree bit, and we actually carve into the surface of the material. Then we also use a V bit to come around the edge here, and eventually this is going to be our gold leaf inline border. And this area right here is actually going to be painted classic Liberty red. The sign itself will be white, and the lettering is going to be black. Now, in this big area right here that looks like there's nothing in it, and it looks a little messy, we've actually put a paint mask on it before we paint it. And what I'm going to do while I'm talking here is I'm going to peel this mask off, and you can see that I'm exposing the wood underneath. The reason we do that is because we have a three-dimensional carving that I'm working on in a material called Forever Wood, which is high-density urethane. And this is going to allow us to get a good bond between the wood and the high-density urethane, which our carving is going to be. And there you go. Alright, so this is the three-dimensional carving that's going to go onto this Harman cheese sign. And essentially, the main items of this carving, there is a cheese knife here, there's a cutting board, there's cheese itself, and there are some apples. And this has all been roughed in by our computerized router, and what I've got to do next is I've got to go in and work with chisels to go ahead and cut it. And what I want to do now is I just want to show you this is what it's going to look like when it's finished. And if Cam can pull back a little bit, you can start getting an idea of what the sign's going to look like once we have the three-dimensional carving on it. And it's a two-sided sign, so we have to do 2 of these. So now I'm going to go get my tools and actually start carving. Okay, so what I did was I just printed out a paper copy of what this three-dimensional carving is going to look like to basically serve as my guide while I carve. So now I'm going to go get my carving tools and we can get started. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do carving-wise is I'm going to work on this piece of cheese. And right now, the way we've roughed this out with the router is that the cheese is perfectly flat on top. What I want to do is I want to knock this rectangle down so that its highest point is here and it almost intersects perfectly with the cutting board. So all of that black I'm going to be taking off, and I'm going to be taking it off the whole way. Now what I'm using is I'm using a traditional wood carver's chisel to just knock this material away. And it's nice to be able to rough this out with the computerized router because it saves me a heck of a lot of work. But doing it this way is also an advantage because then you get that nice hand-worked look. So I'm just going to carve away at this, and this is probably going to take me about 10 or 20 minutes. Okay, so I've gotten to a certain point with this cheese, and if you look at it from the side, you can see that I'm starting to get that angle that I want. The other thing that I have that's really nice is I have these really nice consistent tool marks the whole way through, which gives it a lot of visual interest and character. And I'm also going to do that very lightly to the top of this piece, going the other direction, just to make it more interesting. So the cheese will look like it's all been hand carved. Now what I'm turning my attention to is I'm turning my attention to this apple. Now what I've already done here, and you can see it a little bit, is I've knocked this seed out. I've carved down into everywhere but the seed. And what that does is that emphasizes the shape. I'm going to do the same thing here along the skin of the apple. So what I basically do is I just go in here, and because we're using this Better Wood product, or high density urethane, when we stop carving, it basically stops on a dime, which makes it a really fantastic material to hand carve like this with. And this is something I absolutely could do with the router. I could three-dimensionally model this, and the router would just cut this all the live long day. I wouldn't even need to touch it. But since I'm only probably doing two of these ever for that one sign, it's a two-sided sign, it doesn't make sense for me to spend, I don't know, the 6 hours it would take me to three-dimensionally model this. I can do it quicker by hand and be done with it. Now it would be different if Harman's cheese was all over the country and I could potentially be doing 30 of these signs or even 6 of these signs. Then it would be worth three-dimensional modeling so the router could just spit these out whenever. Now the other thing I'm going to do with this is I'm going to start going along the side here and carving it to start rounding it off so it looks more like, you know, that apple-y roundness that you expect to see. And the thing I like about carving is a lot of times I never go into this with a specific, I want it to look like this kind of thing. I pretty much let the tool do whatever it wants, and then I end up with something that, oh look, I actually like that. I don't sweat making it look exactly like I want. A lot of times the materials and the tools will give you something better than you can imagine. Okay, now the other thing I'm going to do, you know, I've worked on the cheese, I've started the apple. The other thing I'm going to do with this cutting board is I'm going to go in and I'm going to round the edge, just like you would expect to see with a cutting board. Now, this cutting board, the majority of this is going to be done with paint. We're going to make this look like a cutting board just by virtue of the paint, the colors we painted. But the one thing we need to do with this is I do need to knock this down and ease this edge to round it off. And it's these kind of things that is really fun to carve because you get these nice long satisfying curls of material coming off, which, yes, it's fun to do and it's very satisfying and it really makes you feel like you're getting some work done. Okay, so one other thing we want to do with this, it's something I actually don't do all that often, but I want to start doing more of it, is doing a textured background hand carved. And what I've done here is I've kind of noodled around a little bit trying to figure out what kind of pattern I want to do. And this is done with what's called a veining chisel, which is what this is. It has a very steep scoop which allows you to take a nice little dig of material out of the material. And what I want to end up with is a pattern something like this. So what I'm going to do is come in here and I'm just going to start taking little gouges like this out of the material. And it is something that you can actually do pretty quickly, and you know, it's very satisfying, it's very fun, and because we're doing this with the Better Wood product, which is fantastic for carving, it goes very, very quickly and it's almost effortless. And we're going to end up with a very, very nice, very, very interesting background pattern. And The nice thing about putting any kind of texture into a sign is it makes it a lot more interesting. It catches the eye more, and that's really the point of any kind of sign that's done. You want to call attention to the business, you want to call attention to the sign, and anything that's going to make the sign a little more visually interesting is usually worth the effort. Alright, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to finish up all of this carving, and then I'm going to bring you all back later and show you what the finished product looks like, let you see me do the last couple finishing touches, and this will be ready to go into the paint shop.